Hello, I am here to share more information from the research of Trevor Nurse. This time we are looking at the history of churches and chapels across Old and New Whittington and Whittington Moor. When the Industrial Revolution reached Whittington, people came in their droves to seek work, and with them came their need for religion. The little parish church of St. Bartholomew was already full. And so, on Sundays, people began to meet in groups wherever they could, becoming what the established church called nonconformists. The result was a remarkable flowering of chapel building across the three Whittingtons and Sheepbridge, almost entirely funded by the working communities themselves. The first Wesleyan chapel in Old Whittington was built of stone in 1828, just below the Revolution House, with seating for 175 people. The building still stands today. It is now a cottage, appropriately named Chapel Cottage. By the 1890s, the congregation had outgrown it. A larger chapel was built in Church Street in 1894, to Gothic designs by Mr. Blake of Chesterfield, at a cost of £1,500. It had seating for 300. The builder was John Sims of New Whittington. This building survives today as the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In 1865, the Primitive Methodist movement built their chapel in Old Whittington. They called it Mount Tabor. It stood in Church Street, just opposite the school, and was first designed to hold 160 people, later extended to 250. It was used until the 1960s, then demolished. Flats and houses now occupy the site, in an area still known as the Mount. Trevor pauses at this point in his writing to reflect on what the Church of England must have thought about the rapid rise of nonconformist chapels throughout the village. He is struck by the speed with which ordinary working people raised money to build their own places of worship. The Church of England's response was to build two mission churches, one for the growing population at Sheepbridge, and one for the fast-growing east side of the village at New Whittington. The Sheepbridge Mission Church was built in 1875 on the corner of Prospect Road and Sheffield Road. As a boy, Trevor could just remember it, a building of corrugated steel sheets, painted green in his recollection. He was never quite sure it looked like a church. It was called St. Simon and Jude. Although it was only meant to be temporary, it lasted until 1957. In 1958 a more modern mission was built in George Street, which was itself demolished around 1975. The New Whittington Mission, St. Barnabas, was built in 1884 in a more substantial style. In 1927 it became the parish church of New Whittington, creating a separate parish. A pen drawing of it appears in the church's Jubilee booklet of 1934, made by George Henry Hilson. John Wesley himself visited Chesterfield in August 1776 and preached in the marketplace, and again the following year. By 1795, a Wesleyan chapel had been established at Saltergate in Chesterfield. On Whittington Moor, the Wesleyan movement began in a large wooden structure on Pottery Lane, one of the pottery buildings, in 1835. William Johnson, the pottery owner, was the leader. At that time, the moor was still sparsely settled, just a few houses around the bottom of Pottery Lane, a small cluster at the junction of Sheffield and Eckington Road, and another group at the bottom of St. John's Road. The Ubold Wesleyans built their chapel in 1842, and the Pottery Lane group gradually faded. Then in 1870, the clubroom of the Queen's Hotel was rented for services. With increasing numbers, a piece of land was purchased in 1872 from James Patrick Hullaby for £72, on which a new church was to be built. The trustees of that new church were a fascinating cross-section of the local community: iron founders, a gentleman, a contractor, a cordwainer, a chemist, a pottery manager, and a farmer. The breadth of support speaks to how widely the chapel movement had spread across all trades and occupations. A schoolroom was added at the rear the following year, with Mrs. Fenwick laying the foundation stone. By 1902 the schoolroom had become unsafe, and a new separate school was built on Station Road in 1904, by Mr. John Wright, a builder from Barlow, at a cost of £1,277. In 1941, the Primitive Methodists and Wesleyans on Whittington Moor amalgamated. The combined church became the Sheffield Road Methodist Church. Its first joint service took place on the 18th of January, 1942. The church was renovated many times throughout its life before being demolished to make way for the new A61 bypass. A little mission hall was built on Pottery Lane and Henry Street in 1901, at a cost of £140, as part of the Wesleyan Church. It was opened on the 10th of July, 1901. Made of corrugated steel sheets, it was sometimes called the Tin Mission Hall. Throughout its life, the Sunday school attracted the children of the neighborhood. But as the founding members aged and died, the congregation dwindled, and the mission closed in 1935. The old building still stood in 2001 as part of Hepworth's coal yard. The Primitive Methodists first built a small chapel in Bunting's Yard in 1841. That building still stands today, extended at the front to reach the pavement. For many years it was the British Legion Club, and at the time Trevor was writing, it was known as the Chester's Club. In 1897, a much larger Primitive Methodist chapel was built on Station Road, where the large roundabout stands today. It was called the Ebenezer Chapel and could hold 600 people. Their large earlier chapel had been erected in 1867 on the corner of Sheffield Road and Duke Street. By 1900, the school accommodation was inadequate. A new site was eventually obtained in St. John's Road, and the schoolroom was built there, a very large building, as Trevor's photograph shows. It was demolished for the A61 bypass road layout. The Congregational Church stood just behind where the Lidl supermarket is today, with a schoolroom built in 1878. Some of its most prominent members were the Pearson family, the Pearsons of Pearson's Pottery. There is also a church hall or schoolroom in Avenue Road, dated 1910 above the front door. The Salvation Army Barracks in Shaw Street was built in the late 1880s. Trevor remembers it well. He worked in the building for 2 years after it was bought by Derek Alsop, the heating engineer, around 1968. New Whittington was, as Trevor first said, a village with no history, one that only began around 150 years before he was writing. And yet, in the space of just a few decades, it developed a rich landscape of chapels, missions, and churches that served its rapidly growing community. The first chapel in New Whittington was built by a society known as the Whittington Free Reformers, formed around 1856 to 1857. In 1858, they bought a piece of land from John and William Fowler on Cross London Street, and moved in for services the following year. Later renamed the United Methodist Free Church, or simply the Free Church, it served the community for over a century. Trevor remembers going to the Christian Endeavour meetings there as a boy around 1949. A new organ was installed in 1957, but the congregation was already declining, and the church closed and was demolished in the late 1960s. The Primitive Methodist Chapel in Back South Street was built in 1859 and served the community for 79 years. In May 1938, the Education Department purchased it to build a gymnasium on the site. Special closing services were held, and the congregation amalgamated with the Wellington Street Methodist Church. Trevor includes a remarkable contemporary account from the Derbyshire Times of May 1938, describing those final services, the scholars gathering, the minister preaching, and then locking the door for the last time as all adjourned together to Wellington Street. It is a poignant moment, and a reminder of how much these chapels meant to the people who worshipped in them. The Wesleyan movement in New Whittington began in 1858, just as Firth Steel Works and the West Staveley Colliery were bringing new families into the village. The moving force was Mr. Fenwick, the colliery manager, and a small group of others. They first met in a colliery building, then hired the clubroom of the Wellington Hotel in 1859. On the 17th of June, 1861, they bought 200 square yards of land in Wellington Street for £70 and 10 shillings, and built their chapel. A schoolroom was added behind in 1868. An organ was installed in 1872. Electricity finally arrived in 1925. Until then, the building had been lit by gas. One of its most devoted long-standing members was Herbert Needham, the same man who was headmaster of New Whittington School for over 40 years. He was preacher, society steward, leader, and trustee of the Wellington Street Church. In 1932, aged 80, he moved to Bournemouth. The church was still in use when Trevor was writing, and had recently been renovated. In 1862, the Baptists built their chapel on High Street, beside the entrance to the old marketplace. It cost £600. A Sunday school was added at the rear. Before this, The congregation had met above a blacksmith shop on Handerley Road. The building survives today, used as a workshop and storage space. New Whittington also had a Catholic church with a large following. The original church was built in 1906 in Wellington Street. A wooden church hall, an ex-army barrack hut from the First World War, was erected alongside around 1920. In 1969, a new church hall was built on the High Street, and a few years later a new church was built alongside it. The old church was demolished. As late as 1934, a new mission was being built in New Whittington. The Gospel Mission opened on the 20th of January, 1935. It stood where the swimming baths are today, made of wooden frames with asbestos panels and an asbestos tile roof. It later changed its name to the Pentecostal Church, and was eventually demolished when the swimming baths were built on the site. In Sheepbridge, the Free United Methodists built their chapel in 1874, on Sheffield Road opposite the Sheepbridge Hotel, to hold 150 people. It fell into disuse and was demolished in the late 1970s. The Primitive Methodists built the Bethel Chapel in Sheepbridge in 1890, to hold 226 people. Trevor records the bricklaying ceremony in detail from the Derbyshire Courier, the Whittington Moor Salvation Army Band playing selections, a public tea in a large marquee on the cricket ground with over 120 people, and a public meeting afterwards. A list of subscriptions shows the generosity of local supporters. These are the memories that Chapter 3 is really about. Not just the dates of buildings, the names of architects and the costs of construction. But the families who packed those pews, the communities that built and sustained these places from their own pockets, their own faith, and their own determination that their children and their neighbors' children should have something worth having. Thank you for watching this documentary, produced by the Whittington History and Heritage Group from the archive of Trevor Nurse. Part of Our History has a voice project. If you have memories, photographs, or documents connected to the schools and chapels of Whittington, we would love to hear from you.